Nigeria's executive government has raised its 2025 expenditure outlook from 49.7 trillion to 54.2 trillion naira. This is based on the more optimistic revenue outlook from government agencies, the Federal Inland Revenue Service and the Customs Service. Tonight, Babajide Ogunsoro, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share more analysis, insight and intelligence about the revised expenditure program of the government. Babajide, great to have you again on the News Hour. Good evening. Yes. So let's get into it. 4.5 trillion naira. Well, that's the additional amount that the federal government has signaled that it's going to, use to increase the 2025 budget. Now, some of our raised concerns about, the revenue assumptions. How realistic are these projections?
So when we look at the projections, how realistic are the projections? Perhaps depends on how realistic are President Donald Trump's campaign promises. For instance, just 6 months ago, on August 14th last year, when he was campaigning in Asheville, North Carolina, he had clearly made a promise that what he intends to do within the next 12 to 18 months is to cut crude oil prices by half. Now, if this happens, it significantly affects not only Nigeria's budgets, the budgets of a lot of other African countries, and yes, other emerging and developing economies. So the real question is, how realistic are Donald Trump's campaign promises? Because it will really affect our assumptions. Let's take a look at perhaps the 7 most critical aspects of the federal government's budget assumptions, and we'll clearly be able to understand how this additional expenditure outlook, how realistic is it. If we take a look at the 7 critical budget assumptions, I classify 3 as realistic, 2 as optimistic, and 2 as unrealistic. So let's start with the first 3 that I classify as realistic. The assumptions of oil production of 2.06 million barrels per day, based on the sort of progress we are seeing in the security sector, based on the sort of commitments we are seeing from the NNPC and its group CEO, we strongly feel that oil production assumptions are realistic. Exchange rate assumptions of approximately 1,500 naira per dollar are realistic. We also feel that number 6, debt service assumptions of about 16.33 trillion naira are realistic. So those are the 3 assumptions we feel are realistic. Which ones do we feel are optimistic? Oil price of $75 per barrel, based on what is happening globally, is an optimistic projection. Our second optimistic projection is currently our inflation rate of 34.2% makes inflation rate target as at the end of the year of 15%. Optimistic. Now, Ayotunde, which 2 do we feel are unrealistic? Number 4 and number 5. The federal government's revenue projections and the federal government's expenditure projections. And clearly in the course of this discussion, I'll explain to you why I feel the revenue projections and the expenditure projections are unrealistic.
Interestingly, because I was definitely going to ask you, but let's talk about the amounts that government spent, or should I say earn, in the year 2024. How much did the federal government actually earn last year? And of course, has the Ministry of Finance and the CBN released a report even as we speak?
So as we speak, yes, the central bank has released reports for the first 9 months of the year, and yes, facts don't lie. And let's jump straight into the numbers and statistics, because it will allow us to understand how realistic are the government's revenue projections. And if we take a look at these facts, by looking at how much revenue was earned in the first 9 months, the central bank says that for the federal government, 6.1 trillion naira was the federal government's retained revenue for the first 9 months. However, to look at what's in front of you, over 70% of this came from government agencies classified as independent revenue, 2.6 trillion naira, and exchange rate gain, 1.8 trillion naira. Less than 1 trillion naira came from the Federation account, less than 700 billion naira from the VAT pool, excess oil account, less than 110 billion naira. In summary, majority of the earnings for the federal government last year was independent revenue from government agencies, and exchange rate gain. The question now is, will the sort of revenue that the government earned based on the exchange rate gain of 2024, is it projecting such volatility for the Naira this year? The answer is likely no. Independent revenue, how significantly different will the independent revenue of 2024 be from 2025? Don't forget, in the first 9 months, the federal government only earned 6.1 trillion naira. Based on this new projections from the government and from the president is saying that it expects to spend 54 trillion naira. Ayotunde.
So what's the real outlook now? I mean, because some economists have already said that, the increased government spending at this time could be counterproductive, to reducing inflation. How realistic? What's the situation now?
So for me, the government...
What's likely to happen?
So what's likely to happen is, yes, the president will go ahead with his intention. He's called this the budget of restoration, and the expectation is based on his history and his style, especially in the last 3 months. He intends to make that happen. That is the executive government's position. However, based on statistical analysis, this is, yes, a budget of restoration, as the president has called it, but this looks like more of a budget of magical tricks. And now, what do I mean by it's a budget of magical tricks? Let's take a look at the chart of the week, because the chart of the week makes it plainly clear. Again, the facts don't lie. If we take a look at the chart of the weeks, look at the government's revenue and its annual growth. Let's look at just 3 critical years. 2023, Ayotunde, the federal government earned a revenue of 7.4 trillion naira. That was good news, a 32% growth over the previous revenue of 2022. However, based on the central bank's reports, they say that in the first 9 months of last year, the federal government earned 6.1 trillion naira. Going by that running rate, when the full report of 2024 comes out, our expectation is that 2024 revenue will be 8.24 trillion naira for the federal government. However, the federal government is saying it intends to earn a revenue this year of 41 trillion naira. That's a 400% increase on its running rate. So hopefully this will be a budget of restoration, but if we look at the facts, we're coming from a running rate of about 8 trillion naira. The government says this year it is looking at, and it is eyeing, 40 trillion naira. And that's why a lot of analysts and economists say perhaps this is a budget of magical tricks. Anthony, do your magic.
Well, we'll do our magic and definitely keep tabs on the situation as it improves. Well, thank you so much, Babajide, for your analysis on the news.
The pleasure is all mine.